Hello and welcome.
Older men, and in the middle of that dense formation were the less experienced men, the younger men. And the younger men, before they clashed with the Athenians, were nervous. We're going to go into battle against the Athenians. And the men in the back line said, no problem. We beat these guys at Coronea 25 years earlier. The men in the back line were in their 50s or 60s. So we're looking at a citizen levy called out in this battle. This warfare was also devised at a time when the Greek city-states were relatively scattered and small in both numbers and prosperity. And the way most battles were fought traditionally was on level plains. There's apparently a story attributed to, there is a story attributed to a Persian who apparently said that this was a ridiculous type of fighting. The story comes out of Herodotus. The Greeks live in a mountainous country, only 10% of the country is plain, and they come up with a form of warfare in which you can only fight on the level plains. What a ludicrous way of fighting. Well, not in the conditions of early Greece, certainly before 500 BC. Most hoplite encounters were violent. There were also brief encounters. They were decisive battle. One side lost, the other side won. And the way these battles took place is a city-state such as Argos in Peloponnese would attack its lesser neighbor Mycenae. And those citizen levies would march to the border of Mycenae, and their first goal was to get to the cultivated fields and burn the crops. And they knew that at some point, between crossing the frontier, the political frontier, appearing at the cultivated field, the army of Mycenaeans was going to be lined up there waiting for a hoplite battle. Because you could not afford to see your fields burn, you would starve or at least be very hungry during the winter. And so hoplite battles, up until the Persian invasion of 480 BC, were probably usually a brief affair. Fought over border zones, one side would win, the other would lose, or it would be a draw and they would back off. All you had to do was threaten the fields and the orchards of the opposing side, and you'd get your hoplite battle. There wasn't much strategy involved there. Another unusual aspect about this fighting is, and in time the Greeks learned to deal with it, is that the hoplite formation was very vulnerable to attack in the flanks. That is, the cavalry or light infantry could get behind. Given the confusion of battle, the fact you had a limited vision with those helmets, the dust that inevitably would occur in battle, a line could be panicked. And in many hoplite battles, the infantry line actually drifted to the right. Thucydides tells us of this in a battle in 418 BC at Mantinea, which is in the Peloponnesus, that is southern Greece today.
We have this next
And it's an important battle during the
40 and 40 is a thread.
That's
That's what I saw first, that's what you can read.
For a moment what Thucydides observed, he was at the battle, and in my opinion actually taught the King Aegis afterwards about that. And this is what he tells us. After this, the
Oh, dus je wil fight? Ja. Ik ga gewoon de derde again. Ja. Okay.
Jeg din vurdering er blitt utfordret av min Norges
Nå da. Vi er ute på en gang. Takk just det. Det går for Kill the bandits, don't worry. Oh, yes. army of wounded soldiers. Wrap yourself with cloth to avoid the effects of the gas. I missed it. What's the best then again? I think it's bug actually. Let's kill him. Okay. Okay, that was weird because normally you can actually capture them and still it counts as kill. We saw it before. Maybe not for this mission since it's so early. Since it's so early, we got it. Let's go and have a look.
Two armies met, the Argives and their allies advancing with great violence and fury, while the Spartans came on slowly, and to the music of many flute players in their ranks. This custom of theirs has nothing to do with religion. It is designed to make them keep in step and move forward steadily without breaking their ranks, as large armies often do when they are just about to join battle. This is a very important point, and the Spartans are superb at doing this. While they were still approaching each other, King Aegeus, he's the king of Sparta, decided to take the following measures. It is true of all armies that when they are moving into action, the right wing tends to get unduly extended, and each side overlaps the enemy's left with its own right. This is because fear makes every man want to do his best to find protection for his unarmed side in the shield of the man next to him on the right, and thinking that the more closely the shields are locked together, the safer he will be. The fault comes originally from the man on the extreme right of the front line, who is always trying to keep his own unarmed side away from the enemy, and this fear spreads to the others who follow his example. The far right is the point of honor, and that's still a tradition in battlefields today, and it goes to the fact that he's not protected by his neighbor's shield, and so he inevitably drifts to the right to try to avoid direct contact with the enemy and getting himself speared, and so breaking up the line. And this is a technique, this is a tendency in all hoplite lines, and this was only remedied by developing more sophisticated armies with new units that could support heavy infantry. These would be light armed troops known as peltasts, archers, cavalry, and these innovations are very, very clear in the Peloponnesian War, where the type of fighting is far more sophisticated and far more deadly than those clashes in early Greece over just border zones. The second point of this lecture I mentioned was the political implications of this type of fighting. Hoplite warfare came into use in Greece at a pivotal point in Greek political and intellectual developments. And it causes us to back up for a moment and review some of what is known of earlier Greek history, which some of you may be familiar with in other courses in the teaching company. In the Bronze Age, from 1600 to 1200 BC, when we have our earliest Greek city-states, these are petty kingdoms, bureaucratic states, about a dozen in number, which very much resemble the types of governments you see in the ancient Near East.
I didn't expect you to believe me, so I brought this. Here's your proof. A sample of the special wood you also badly. These bows you're making, I bet would be worthy of a quarrel for all the trouble I come to.
By the gods! You sure you work with Marcos? He's never once delivered on a promise. Incredible.
I might work, but we're nothing alike. I'm true to my word.
Then take your pay. Give none to Marcos.
their warfare was based on chariots. Now that whole system collapses after 1200 BC and is replaced by cavalry in what we call the early Iron Age, that is the period after about 12 or 1100 BC. And by 900 BC, iron has come into general use, usually for edged weapons. The armor was still usually made of bronze, and cavalry becomes the preferred arm of mobile forces, not chariots. And cavalry is very expensive in Greece. You can't graze horses very easily, given the landscape. The exceptions are Boeotia and Thessaly in central and northern Greece. Horses have to be grain-fed. If you own horses, you can put horses in chariot races and other types of races at great gain. You're an extremely wealthy man. And in, the time of Homer, around 750 BC, cavalry was apparently the decisive arm, battle. That meant the governments in the Greek world were largely aristocracies. By 750 BC, kingship was gone. The Spartans retained kings, we'll get to that in the coming lectures, but in most Greek city-states, by 700 BC, they were aristocratic republics, dominated by the landed classes who could provide the horses and the armament to fight as cavalry. Well, that domination by a small, charmed elite of aristocrats passed very quickly after 700 BC with the adoption of hoplite warfare. This proved to be more effective. Hoplites could counter cavalry. No horses would ever do a frontal charge against Greek hoplites. The horse is too smart, it'll veer away. Only a man is crazy enough to throw himself on a mass of spears. Second is, ancient cavalry didn't have stirrups, so you can't do the type of charges that most people associate with cavalry. And hoplite warfare was something that could be managed by all people who owned property. Men who had the means to provide the arms would serve in the civic levies, and that meant the assemblies, the voting citizens, increased in numbers. And very quickly, aristocracies gave way to broader-based governments because of the adoption of hoplite warfare. In many instances, tyrants seized power. These were usually down on their luck, were ambitious aristocrats who put themselves at the head of the armed citizens, broke the power of the aristocracy, carried out political and constitutional reform, but they themselves usually fell from power because there were no traditions of monarchy, they lacked the resources to hire bureaucrats, to hire professional soldiers, and so tyrants ended up being very similar to what Americans today would think of as dictators, that is, strong men who seize power, who try to rule constitutionally with a cult of charisma, and once they pass the scene, other types of forms of government, constitutional rule, reassert themselves. And this was a pattern pretty typical in Greece in the 7th and 6th century BC, that is the 600s and 500s BC. We see it earliest in Corinth, which is the great city in the northeastern corner of the Peloponnesus, great commercial power, where tyrants come in, break the power of the aristocracy, the Bacchiad aristocrats. That tyrant is Cypselus, and his son Periander. The family is overthrown after 2 generations, and what you get is what is even called an oligarchy or a timocracy, that is the government of the few, or the government by honor or rank, in which the high offices of state, the governing council are the top classes, but the assembly is made up of all landowners, and the assembly has a fair amount of say in electing officials and policy. Men without property, of course, and women and children, because they don't provide any military function, have passive rights as citizens, legal rights, but again, they don't vote. Aristotle, writing in the 4th century BC, was the first to make the observation that military service dictated constitution. When the Greek world was dominated by cavalry, that meant you had an aristocracy. When it shifted to hoplites, you moved to oligarchies and democracies. And in the upcoming lecture, when we talk about naval warfare, when you adopt a certain type of ship, warship, trident, you get a democracy. Because all men can row in the fleet, and that is the hallmark of the Athenian. The Athenians moved to democracy, where their notion of democracy is greatly accelerated and reinforced because they become a naval power. So the political dynamics of Greek city-states, and they're all city-states that have certain common political assumptions, the type of government you get in a city-state is very much determined by the type of military expected by citizens. Yet all Greeks agreed, and this is found in the earliest poems of Hesiod, works and days of the Theogony, is that the city-state, however the citizens are defined, whether it's the landed class who serve as hoplites, whether it's a broader-based democracy as in Athens, but the city-state itself rests on its citizens, and the city-state provides the means of ruling by laws passed by the citizens. And the Greeks have this conceit that only they live in a polis. Their citizens pass laws which they obey, and that marks them from everyone else. The rest of the world are considered barbarians, not because of some kind of cultural or racial inferiority, but because they do not live by the rule of law. They live under kings. And kings are above the law, and their subjects, most Greeks are slaves, because they are subjects to a master. And that political conceit, dividing the rest of the world off from the Greeks, is a fundamental perception that characterizes Greek city-states, and is an important point to recall and remember as we discuss the origins, of course, of the culture. The other important point I would make on this politically, and I stress very much, that is so much dependent on those citizens fighting in their ranks together. And that was a type of virtue, that was a type of bravery, characteristic of the Greek citizen culture. It meant he should practice sophrosyne, moderation. The passage I read, Spartans are so good at it because they march in step. They don't go in wildly into battle. The notion of moderation, the notion of sophrosyne, that notion that comes through in Greek literature and the measured approach in Greek intellectual debate that is sometimes argued. Whether it was actually practiced is another matter. I think the Greeks often got quite excited in their debates, at least the Athenians. Nonetheless, that is a notion that is closely associated with that type of hoplite warfare. It is not the individual warrior who counts. Tyrtaeus, writing in the 7th century BC, Spartan poet, says, "The man that I really respect is a man who stands in the battle line, can be short in stature, stocky, a little bow-legged," apparently a self-portrait. But he has the courage to stand with his fellow citizens. And should a fellow citizen fall, and you're in the second...
in modern societies, it is your vote that counts. Yeah. In medieval society, it's your count that votes. Right. Yeah.
Right. You move forward and replace that vacant place so the line doesn't break. And that whole notion of bravery, very important. Socrates, remembered as the great philosopher in Athens, he could point to service in hoplite battles to the jury and win sympathy. Everyone was expected to serve. And that's an important point to stress. When wars were voted, that meant the assembly went to war. This was not some sort of abstract voting of the professional army. The citizens, initially, they all marched off to war together. And so that is an important point always to recall when we discuss the diplomatic and political issues leading to the Peloponnesian War. This was not some kind of abstract vote. Now, the Peloponnesian War, the third point in this lecture, the Peloponnesian War significantly will change or accelerate changes, I suspect, that were already in progress. Many scholars, especially Victor Hansen, who has studied Greek hoplite warfare, wrote a very important book on it called The Western Way of War, he and others have argued that Greek infantry combat as devised in the Archaic Age, that is the period from 750 to 480 BC, that early period that saw the emergence of the Greek city-state, that form of warfare, infantry combat, comes to characterize Western warfare ever since. It was also associated with decisive battle. Some would argue that it is likely connected with the West's stress on discipline and training, and ultimately on technology and augmenting the power of soldiers, who will fight far more effectively as soldiers rather than as warriors. And that distinction between soldiers and warriors, that is individual bravery as opposed to the collective will of disciplined soldiers on the battlefield, that is a point often traced back to this Greek civic warfare. I think the position is overdrawn, but there's a great deal of virtue to that. One can still needs to study the Assyrian army in order to verify that. I think the Assyrians would have a discipline certainly comparable to the Greeks, and it probably goes back even earlier in the Eastern army. Nonetheless, scholars have looked at the Greek world as the start of this Western way of war. And the development of warfare in the Greek world also fueled a great deal of the economic and fiscal development of Greek city-states. Again, this has caused scholars working in the vein of William McNeill in his important book on the pursuit of power, in which he's argued that the so-called military-industrial complex, which has been debated since the 1960s and 1970s in the United States, that this notion of the connection between economic development and warfare is something that goes back very early in Western tradition and is already seen in the Greek world, where the cost of manufacturing this armament, and we'll see the naval forces, one of the main ways of fueling economic growth in these Greek city-states, which in some ways don't really look like market economies as we understand them, and are in some ways primitive in the sense that most of the people are engaged in manufacturing or consumable goods or foodstuffs, so that it is not at all an economy that would move towards industrialization. The arms industry, in effect, becomes one of the main ways of stimulating economic growth. Well, these are all significant points. We'll be returning to these themes in some of the lectures that are coming up in this course. But the irony about the Peloponnesian War is that it was fought by hoplite citizen armies, but there was no real decisive battle. That the tradition of moving that infantry into the great clash, in which the battle would decide who's going to win and who's going to lose, never happened. There's several reasons for this. One of them is going to be the fact that both Sparta and Athens at this point have evolved beyond city-states. They're at the heads of great leagues, or in the case of Athens, we can even call it an empire. They have resources and means that one single battle isn't going to decide the issue. And we end up with a war of attrition. A war of attrition that will have very profound consequences for the Greek world. The second important point is they're already innovating on warfare. They understand the limitations of a hoplite battle. They're hiring more professionals, peltasts, light infantry, cavalry. Some of them are coming from the more remote areas of the Greek world. Some of them are from areas that aren't Greek at all. But warfare has become more complex. Naval warfare has also evolved to a more complex level. And that also dictates why the Peloponnesian War doesn't conform to this early image of a hoplite battle and the so-called notion Western warfare is always going to be aimed towards a decisive battle. And finally, the third reason, in my opinion, is that Pericles, the great Athenian statesman who presides over Athens at the outbreak of the Peloponnesian War, framed a strategy in which he hoped to preserve citizens' lives by sacrificing property. And he aimed for an indirect approach, a war of attrition, perhaps even a settlement of diplomacy rather than by battle. And that would be the third reason why this war did not meet expectations on either side.
We'll leave it there for now, sir.